to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and joining me for this latest installment of the greatest TV drama episodes of all time, the Billy Ray to my Louis Winthorpe. No, wait, that's not right. The Reggie Hammond to my Jack Nope, that's not it at all. And he's not Prince Hakeem. Oh yeah, it's W Axel Foley. Hey, Axel.
Hello, Scott. Thank you so much for having me, brother. It is my utmost pleasure to be here on your podcast.
I am thrilled that you're here as well. Your reputation precedes you. That's why I tried to give you more of a deluxe style of intro there. Not just because you're a first timer, figured I'd go a little above and beyond, but I just couldn't think of a good yin to yang, heckle to jekyll kind of thing. So I'm just going to be a banana in the tailpipe here. Maybe it's a topic for another podcast. So, and by the way, everyone out there, if you don't get all the references in that intro, you're either too young or you're too dumb, so move on. Anyway, Eddie Murphy is not the subject matter of this podcast. But before we get to that, this is a rare instance because you haven't been on the podcast before. And yes, I am aware that at least a few of our listeners are very familiar with you. I'm figuring the bulk might not be. So if you wouldn't mind spending like a lukewarm minute here and just giving a little bit of the W Axel Foley backstory, as far as podcasting, etc., for us all.
I surely will. I mean, who doesn't enjoy talking about themselves?
I can't imagine what that's like.
Often when I'm on a podcast, this is my favorite part, when I get to create my own mythology, as I spend all my time talking about other people's mythologies.
Right.
I am a Jersey boy, born and raised, went to Rutgers, lived in New York, then moved to North Carolina. Then moved out here to, I lived in Durham, North Carolina. My wife is a Dookie. And now I live out here in Portland, Oregon.
Wow.
And I've been podcasting for about 12 years. Started with a show called Lost Mythos Theorycast. Went on to do podcasts Winterfell, Westworld Theorycast. Covered a host of other stuff at the DVR Podcast Network. Myself and my friends Heath and Tim and Gina and Jenny and Brett and Andy and a whole host of other Thaxton, Mike, a whole host of people who are kind of part of our podcast network. A lot of us came through Game of Thrones, but some of the originals, like yourself, and that's how I know you, was that my podcast actually was inspired to start by Jay and Jack.
The Jay and Jack connection lives again.
Yes, of course. The originals. I mean, look, man, when the history of podcasting is told, all the schmucks and the schmoes right out there are going to remember Serial and all this garbaggio. And we know the truth, which is that it was people like us in our basements, our bedrooms, our garages, who picked up mics, who were inspired by talk radio and by TV or whatever, who kind of got podcasting off the ground. And I consider Jay and Jack to be historic podcasters, man. You know, they're like Lucy and Desi of, I don't know which is which. I think Jack is probably Lucy.
I feel like they're more like Lucy and Ethel, but okay.
Yeah, there you go. I like that one. Lucy and Ethel, right?
Yeah.
They both them and Ryan and Jen kind of inspired me to podcast, and they were some of my first guests, and they helped spread the word about my show. And ever since then, I've always been friends with them, and I did one of their 24-hour podcasts. I was in the room when they talked to Damon. So that's how we got to know each other, through the Facebook. If people want to check out my podcast, they can go to dvrpodcast.com. We got a Patreon and a Facebook and all that, but you and I kind of met by commenting on Jay and Jack and then each other's posts, and you came and joined our DVR podcast, Daily DVR. And I really enjoy you because, like myself, you have an opinion on everything.
Oh, yeah. And unlike yourself, I'm actually usually right. But anyway, I was listening to you on a recent podcast, and you were talking about how you actually enjoy being wrong. And I'm like, oh, so he's like the positive version of me, because I just enjoy being right. But anyway.
Well, I really do. I've that's kind of been like one of the first things I said when I started Lost Mythos is, if I'm going to be talking about TV and at some points extrapolating on theories or ideas or such, I have to be open to being wrong, because that's how we learn.
Oh, of course. When it comes, I totally agree. When it comes to theorizing, speculating, that kind of thing, then I am actually happy to be wrong quite often, because sometimes I'm almost disappointed when I'm right.
Yes.
Because then I feel like I spoiled myself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But when it comes to other matters that are related to TV, then, I like to be right. So anyway, congratulations. You've probably just now broken the record for me allowing someone else to talk that much on one of our podcasts, apparently. No,
wow.
I'm just kidding.
I know.
I'm as you may have noticed, I tend to be a little bit on the self-critical side here. But thankfully, we were talking about shows which are mostly absolved of such criticism, because we are back to the countdown of the greatest TV drama episodes of all time. And it's fortuitous that we have a Jersey boy here, because we are driving up New Jersey way to finally on this podcast, pay a visit to The Sopranos, whose season 3 episode Pine Barrens comes in at number 6 on the countdown. Yay! Why don't I have my little sound thing for you, plus? I'll do that later. I'll boo myself. Anyway, honestly, I would also point out the main reason The Sopranos has not really been talked about very much or cited that much on this podcast over the years, I think is mostly due to the fact that my most common, I don't mean to call him common, but Dan is the person I've done the most podcasting with for most of the bulk of our time here, and he's never seen The Sopranos.
Ooh.
So yeah, it's beyond unfortunate. Hopefully one day he will, instead of doing, his 18,000th rewatch of BSG or something, or Frasier. But it's to me, it's very unfortunate, because I think I'm comfortable saying there's very few people who watch The Sopranos and don't think it's one of the best series of all time. Even if it's not their favorite, they would at least acknowledge, oh, it's in the conversation. It's absolutely in the conversation.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. And I have to say to Dan, you got to watch. I mean, I know he's a huge Breaking Bad fan. Mm-hmm. So tonally, I think he would love The Sopranos.
I believe he will. There's a lot there that would actually scratch the Dan itch, and it has nothing to do with mob stuff or violence, because we know that's not what it's really about. But the more cerebral stuff, the fact
that's what I mean. Totally, like The Sopranos has all that, but it's deep and it's amazing.
Yeah, I would even go even further than Breaking Bad. The other show that me and Dan share our love with, and which started the podcast, is Mad Men. Mad Men and The Sopranos shares a lot. I mean, obviously, other than a certain writer, and I'll get to that later, but you can see a lot of The Sopranos in the Mad Men and vice versa. Even after binging The Sopranos, I was struck by how many parts were like, oh, this has a very Mad Men kind of feel to it, even though obviously different worlds, different time periods, whatever, but you can kind of see the bones in both, kind of matching up there.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, I think that you basically, I think Wiener. Do you say Weiner or Wiener?
I have looked it up, and I have it written phonetically for later when I was going to mention him. So you're going to make me scroll through my notes.
It's Wiener.
I'm going to tell you in a second.
Right, isn't it?
I have it here. Just give me a second.
Come on, hurry up.
You kind of took me by surprise. You kind of taking me out of my rhythm here. Typical podcasting professional that you are. Right. I think I wrote it as way. I am taking way. Oh, here we go. It should be over here. I wrote it right after winter. Where did I miss it? Did I just go right by it?
I think it's Wiener.
Kessler. Why? It's Weiner.
Why? Weiner. Okay.
Weiner.
Whatever he wants, he gets. That's how I was always taught in life. My mom said, whatever someone tells you, or my dad said it actually, whatever someone tells you to call him, that's what you call him.
Yeah.
Take
it from me. I'm someone who people try to pronounce my name, the quote unquote, my last name, the quote unquote traditional Italian way. And after it takes me several minutes to explain, I know that 99% of the people in the world who have this last name, the few who have it, are Italian. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those people. So I don't use the Italian pronunciation. It was a teacher who kept insisting on doing it, and before he threw me out of his class for a totally different reason. But it's cool, fun for me. And I have to keep explaining to someone, like, at least if they watched baseball years ago, it's like, the pitcher Tom Candiotti, it's pronounced like that. It's not Candiotti. It's not Candiotti. That's what Italian.
Yeah. So you're not Italian.
I am not Italian. Do not ask my ethnicity. It'll just make my veins burst in my brain because I'm like 8,000 freaking things apparently.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I thought you were Italian. I was thinking about
people
the show.
assume it, but no. Yeah. I grew up around a lot of Italians.
Okay.
Basically, I grew up around just Italians and Jews, pretty much. So anyway, that's not the history I want to dive into right now. And what we'd be aiming to be talking about here. But before I get to The Sopranos, let me reinstate that little disclaimer that I had throughout this countdown, because it got a little muddied on the previous entry. For anyone who's a Buffy fan and you listen to the Buffy one, go listen to it, but prepare for a lot of talk about the Joss Whedon controversy. Oh boy. So, and then me explaining why Hush got chosen instead of, the body. But back to this here. Generally speaking, the countdown is not meant to reflect my own personal opinions or biases. I actually compiled it by a whole lot of research. I did this that I did back in the fall. I combed through numerous lists, articles, websites, etc. to determine the most mentioned, most highly ranked and cited TV episodes, stripped it down to exclude anything that we had already covered extensively on this podcast, and also made sure that there was only one episode per series, and, bada bing, bada boom, the countdown was born, and now we can move on to The Sopranos. This is where I do a little bit of history, and but basically it's basically going to be getting into David Chase in about 5 seconds. The Sopranos, it ran on HBO for 86 episodes from the beginning of 1999 through June of 2007, and yes, it was conceived of and created by David Chase. Now, David Chase, for anyone who doesn't know this out there, he actually started his career a few decades earlier. He was working as a story editor for the great Darren McGavin series, Kolchak the Night Stalker. We've mentioned that series a bunch of times because of the X-Files connection or whatever. And it also led to what was a much bigger break for him, working on the Rockford Files, one of my personal favorite classic series. He actually wrote and produced a ton of episodes there. After that, he did knock about a bit with some success. He had an Emmy-winning TV movie here. He created his own short-lived show there, blah, blah, blah. But basically, he was still fairly somewhat kind of obscure until he managed to strike a deal with the Brad Grey Entertainment Group and HBO to actually make The Sopranos. See, that's how we got to The Sopranos. Now, I'm sure we're going to be talking about the importance and influence of The Sopranos in just a couple minutes, but just sticking with David Chase, just want to point out to everyone, because sometimes people might shy away from a show because what the perceived subject matter is. And you got to realize, kind of like when we were talking about Mad Men, how Mad Men isn't about advertising, although that's, the setting for the show. Yes, this show does feature characters that are mostly mobsters and their immediate families and those in their orbit. But even though Chase was a fan of gangster films going all the way back to the 30s, the show for him was really more of an opportunity to explore family relationships, and himself being an Italian kid who was raised in Jersey, it was his own family and experiences that really informed a lot of his writing more than anything else, anything that was ripped from either cinematic history, though obviously the show does touch on that, or ripped from the headlines. The show touches on those things too. The funniest thing, or the oddest thing, and the thing that should really attract Dan, for example, when you ask Chase himself to cite a major influence on his work when he first started The Sopranos, you know who he picks? You know who he cites? David Lynch and Twin Peaks. That's really, I never would have guessed that. But then when you start thinking about especially certain episodes, like, oh yeah, I can sort of see that.
Definitely. Definitely.
I never asked you. Do I refer to you as W? Do I refer to you as Axel? Do I call you Bill like I've been joking about in the last few podcasts? What do you prefer?
Axel is fine.
Axel works for me. I just love the uniqueness of it.
Thank you.
I don't know how much you love that movie or not, but clearly you must like it since you took the name.
That's what I'm named after.
Oh, but you're not that. Wait, how old are you? No, aren't you just a few years younger than me?
There you go.
Okay,
no,
let's leave it there.
No, it was a nickname. My name is Billy Foley, but people called me Axel when I went to college, so I kept it because it got me into parties.
Oh, if not for licensing issues, which we've experienced too many times on this podcast, I would have had a little bit of the Faltermeyer music playing in the background when we introduced you.
Okay.
I figured he probably heard that joke enough times. So, again, we're just a few years apart anyway. So when The Sopranos first came along, especially considering you as you've said, you were a Jersey guy. I'm guessing you actually were one of the folks like myself. You watched it when it originally aired, I'm guessing?
I did not.
Wow.
I did, I should say, I did partially. Mm-hmm. I am born and raised in Jersey. As we get more into it, I'll regale you with some of my many connections to The Sopranos and Gandolfini, and also Mad Men too, which is funny enough. But I was not, when The Sopranos aired, I was not that into television. I was kind of a bit of maybe a bit of a film snob at that point in my life. I went to Rutgers and majored in journalism, English, and I took every film class they had. Rutgers didn't really have a filmmaking program. At Mason Gross, they had a little bit of a kind of make Super 8 movies, which I was already doing on my own, so I was kind of annoyed that was like the only actual film class they had. But so I majored in film studies, and then I went to write for the Star Ledger, which obviously, if you watch The Sopranos, you know that Tony picks up that paper about 100 times. The Star Ledger is like in every fucking episode. I can curse on this, right?
Yes, you can curse.
Yeah, okay. I thought I could, but it's always nice to ask.
You can't talk about The Sopranos and not curse the way I look at it. Anyway.
Of course.
Be ridiculous. Go on.
Fucking A. But I was more into film, and I didn't really watch TV. And even though I knew, of course, that HBO was kind of making a move into more like premiere, what we then called like premiere TV, I was not really paying attention to it at the time. And then I went to work at a place called World of Video, which is was in Greenwich Village.
I know the place.
Okay.
I knew the place, I should say.
It was, in my opinion, the best video store in Manhattan, though many people like shitty Kim's, but World of Video was better. Kim's was okay. Kim's was like
Kim's had some good stuff, but I understand. Well, but also there's always, whenever you're part of one thing that has a logical competitor, especially in New York, you're naturally going to be negative about it. Doesn't matter if it's Yankees, Mets, Stuyvesant, Bronx High School of Science, which is my issue usually, or World of Video versus Kim's. I get it. And this means nothing to the rest of the country, by the way, but I don't care.
But, Kim's was great, man. Yeah. Kim's is wonderful, and they had a great selection, but they did not have the classic and foreign films that we had, and we also had a ton of stuff that you couldn't get anywhere that we just had on VHS. Oh, yeah. And also half our store was gay porn, so you can't beat that. That's how we stayed in business. But anyway, that's a whole nother story for another podcast.
I didn't know we were covering that episode of The Sopranos.
If I get too nostalgic, tell me, because this really took me down memory lane watching The Sopranos and getting ready for this. And I thank you for having me. But anyway, I didn't really watch it. So when I went to started World of Video, that was one of the first things I picked up. I said, I have to watch this. I started watching it. I think that was 2003 or 2002. So it wasn't too late into it. And then I ordered HBO so I could watch The Sopranos. I hadn't had cable in years. And I was like, I got to get cable. So I got cable so we could watch Sopranos. And I started picking up on everything, which later led me to be sitting there when Lost premiered and really kind of get more into this whole television thing. But this particular episode that we're talking about, what year? This was in 2002, right?
Oh, the Pine Barrens is, I believe it's 2001, actually.
Oh, okay. So I did not watch this when it aired.
Right. I mean, I don't have the year in front of me. I might be wrong, but the reason why I think it's 2001 is because they hadn't changed the opening credits yet. So the World Trade Center is still in the opening credits, and they removed that after 9/11 happened. They were like, yeah, we're going to remove this from this point on. So for me, I actually did watch it when it originally aired. It's funny you talk of being a film snob. There may be a few folks out there who perhaps might want to classify me that way. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't necessarily think of it that way because there are certain aspects of film that I don't consider myself to be all that snobbish about. It's more, for me, I just look at it as having a more expansive knowledge of film and being just as happy watching any number of films from the 30s and 40s. In fact, quite often more happy watching movies of that bygone era than what we have nowadays. I never really let my love and adoration of film have anything to do with my love and adoration for television, because I just I view them in very similar fashions, in the sense that, back in the day, TV was often seen as a training ground for film, and obviously over time that leveled out, and then when you got to the 21st century, TV had kind of overtaken film, and it was starting to pass it by because of that, that change in prestige television, hot peak TV, whatever you want to call it. When you get to a show like The Sopranos, I haven't talked about The Sopranos specifically on the podcast, but I've always made mention of like the show Oz, because that was the original. That's the first dramatic series on not just HBO, just cable in general. That paved the way for The Sopranos, which then paved the way for everything else.
Don't forget First and 10. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I'm gonna try to.
But you're right, Oz. Man, I was a huge, and I should say, Scott, I'm so glad you mentioned it, because when I say that the first thing I picked up at World of Video was The Sopranos, I realized quickly, as you mentioned Oz, that was a lie, because actually it was Oz that I started watching first, and I can't even remember why. Maybe somebody at the store suggested it to me, and that got me into a whole host of things. But that was also, Oz was shot in fucking Secaucus.
That's right.
Like 20 minutes from where I was living at the time in Jersey City.
Yeah, it's interesting how the first couple of HBO series are very much a tri-state affair. Yep. For those of us who live here on the
They're
East
like
Coast.
Law and Order. They're like Law and Order Plus. You see all the same people.
Super Plus, right? Yeah,
Yep,
and then you see those actors again later on The Wire. There's a lot of symbiosis between Oz and The Wire, or whatever. For me, I used to actually. I don't remember when I got HBO, because I first was exposed to cable in the early to mid 90s when I moved, and I have cable now, and everyone else I knew had cable like for several years before me. So, and my first level of excitement was, discovering A&E, and The Fugitive was on every day at 5 o'clock. It's like, I've always wanted to see The Fugitive, and I remember just watching it every day and going, hey, this is like the Hulk. I guess the Hulk must have been like The Fugitive. I just had an epiphany. With Oz, I used to actually tape episodes of Oz and circulate the tapes in my office every week. And I then started to do that when The Sopranos came on. And The Sopranos was actually the show that started to have a ripple effect in just where I worked. All of a sudden, other people started subscribing to HBO. So, it really did what HBO wanted. It probably drove their subscribers more than almost any other show, other than maybe Game of Thrones a decade later, perhaps.
Definitely. Oh, you're right about that, my friend. Yeah. It ushered in a whole new era, And you're right. HBO was always, it's not TV, it's HBO.
Yeah.
It was something different. And it was, we knew growing up. How old are you again?
We don't need to say how old I am.
Oh, okay. I'm 46. I'm going to be 47 pretty soon.
We'll just leave it as I'm older than you. And
Okay. We're older.
I'm older than you, but I look younger, so everything works out fine.
Okay. I'll take it.
I say that to everybody. Don't worry.
I'm married, dude. I don't care how I look. I only got one person to impress. She says I'm doing okay.
There you go.
But we always knew that HBO was like a step above Showtime, or you know what I mean? It was,
yes, I agree.
Even the premier cabler, But it was, you're absolutely right. It was with Oz and then really the Sopranos that it kind of rose up. It's funny because in similar fashion, I feel like The Shield laid the groundwork for so many of the other shows, and it doesn't get as much of the like Oz and The Shield kind of don't get the respect that I think they deserve.
They get
when people talk about the pantheon film of TV.
Well, when they're talking to a TV brainiac like me, they do get their just.
Good.
The adoration for Oz and especially The Shield, whether it be talked about on this podcast or on our page or everywhere else, knows no bounds. I'm massive fan of both. Own them. I'm the idiot who has the big box sets of both those damn shows, even though now I can just watch them for free, all that way. But they look really nice on the shelf, so I don't care. What's really amazing about those shows, and and especially like The Sopranos or Oz, is at the time when we're talking like from 1997 to 1999, and then 2000, whatever, it kind of blew my mind as to what could really be done on a weekly dramatic series. And The Sopranos, more so than any other show, really kind of upped that ante, even 20-fold, because I was intrigued to check it out from the get-go because I was like, oh, gangster stuff. It looks like and I saw the ads, like, oh, it's kind of a Scorsese kind of feel to it, whatever. And then you realize when you watch it, oh, you're getting into some seriously heady, multi-layered storytelling that I wasn't expecting. You realize this was something when you say it's HBO, it's not TV, it's like, oh, I don't even get this out of the movies, quite frankly, because they don't have the largesse of storytelling something over the course of a 13-episode season.
Yes.
So you get to really spend time with these characters.
And can I mention, too, the confidence? Because one of the things that HBO did that they're not doing as much today, and it's something I've actually noticed, and you're a man who understands this stuff and we can speak to it, is that HBO did foundationally start with people who had a long resume, like David Chase, right?
Right.
Who had worked in television for a long period of time and who had been thirsting to be able to tell something other than episodic network television, and who had not been able to, say, break into film, which was the only other option you had, right? There was no American Berlin Alexander plots. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe Twin Peaks in a sense. And when he mentions Twin Peaks, I see the connection definitely through the esoteric, dream-like storytelling that it employs, right? Mm-hmm. But also in the matter that he was allowed to tell that story, which was amazing about Twin Peaks. And when I was a kid my whole family watched Twin Peaks together, which was rather strange. But that's what amazed me when I was a kid. And that's what made me be more of a film purist, is because I didn't see that enough on TV. It was so rare.
Right.
Now it's all over the place.
Right.
But HBO has moved on to welcoming. You see the streamers more kind of going towards more traditional. People have more experience. HBO seems to be giving a lot of people breaks in TV as of late, which I don't think is bad, but I do think that it's good that I like when they start new series like the Game of Thrones stuff, that they are turning to some more seasoned showrunners with the new series, because I think it does help. It's great to have young new talent.
Right.
Like just recently this week, they premiered a show that's written by like a 17-year-old girl or something, and It's of course another HBO show about kids fucking that I'm not going to watch, but I think that's wonderful. But I do appreciate that David Chase had such a long resume.
Yes.
And had thirsted for years to be able to tell a story like this.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree, especially when you look at their first several major series where they were people that, you know, had an impressive resume pre-HBO in one form or another. Whether it be a long-standing series person like a David Milch who would come from NYPD Blue, and this gave him the opportunity to really go above and beyond. Or you can go back to like I think it was Alan Ball with 6 Feet Under,
Ball,
you know, guy who, you know, American Beauty and all those other. But now he got the chance. Or, you know, that's why they would hand someone like Sorkin a chance to do a show because he had already done a few. I personally don't like that show very much, but other people do. Whatever, they're wrong.
Studio 60?
No, the Newsroom was the HBO.
Oh, that's right, the Newsroom. What a weird. I call that a beautiful failed experiment.
Yes, it's the eyes wide shut of Aaron Sorkin's career. So,
we're gonna launch into some Kubrick talk up in here too, huh?
We'll save that for another podcast. See all the stuff you missed out on. You know, I could have helped. You guys could have had, you know, decent brackets after all. Anyway, so all right. Well, everyone take a shot now. It's for you know I was going to mention at one point on this podcast. So yeah, and moving away from obviously the foundation of the show is the creator and the writing, whatever. But I kind of want to move a little bit into and we'll probably get to one of your stories, I think, in a moment. The lead performer, and I want to talk about Gandolfini / Tony Soprano here, and just to get my little spiel out of the way, because this is one of the two things that I'm going to talk about, which I realize. This is potential future podcast subject matter, so I'm really excited. I came up with all these ideas for this stupid podcast. What I was thinking was, when I was watching the show, if I was going to compose a Mount Rushmore, because that's always the phrase people use when they're talking about sports or acting, whatever. Oh, who would be on your Mount Rushmore of stand-up comedians or baseball players or whatever? My Mount Rushmore of like lead actors, and that could be male or female, / characters. And I mean performances that are just not just iconic, but really made that character stand out in such a way beyond simple pop cultural touchstones, beyond just the zeitgeist of the moment kind of thing. I mean, roles where the actors were really transformed themselves and they became those characters in such a way you just didn't even think of it as being a performance anymore. That character lives, breathes, is indelible, is unforgettable as any major fictional character, performance, whatever you want to call it, in the history of not just TV, of film, of the stage, whatever.
Of filmed entertainment.
Yes. I have now. When you do the Mount Rushmore thing, as I understand it, because I've heard this Mount Rushmore has like 4 presidents on it. I don't know. I don't remember school very much. I'm just joking. Of course, I remember. It was 8 presidents, wasn't it? And Trump knocked off 3 of them. So there was a.
I was going to say we almost had 4, 5.
So it was 4. I know 3 that I will fight to the death have to be on there. And,
okay.
As far as I'm concerned. You've got and people who know me know my first one. I'm going to say because it's my bias, whatever. But it's not bias because it's true. Cranston is Walter White.
Yes,
has to be there. Gandolfini's Tony Soprano has to be there. And the other one, this is the one that people aren't going to see coming because they're thinking, oh, it's going to be another amazing, famous, dramatic thing. Nope, going to veer to another one that has to be on that same mountainside. Carol O'Connor is Archie Bunker.
Okay. I like that. I think that's definitely true.
Especially if you ever watched an interview with Carol O'Connor, you realize, oh my God, he's transformed himself. Those are the definite 3, the definitive 3, I guess is a better phrase for it. I think an interesting idea for a podcast or a topic online or a poll or whatever is who deserves the 4th spot? Because there's so many possibilities, and everyone I come up with, I kept coming up with reasons why not that person, why not that person, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a ton, and you broadened it when you brought in Carol O'Connor,
yes, I
because
did.
I was thinking more just like straight dramas, perhaps of our generation. I mean, I do think that Ham in Mad Men is I mean, he is that. He's Don Draper, and I think he forever will be. I think that you mentioned it before. That's a good one. I even think of Chickless in The Shield.
Yep. That's. I want to see if you mention all. I have 4 names, and then I have some other names, and you've just knocked off the first 2. If you get the next 2, you win. You win the prize.
Malone, Cheers.
Not on the list, no.
Okay, I like that one.
Dan would be saying that one. I wouldn't.
I kind of think of that in a way. I don't know. There's so many. That's a whole. Yeah, wow, that really gets you thinking. But I do think either way, whatever the other people are, I would have to say that if you had asked me this question out of the blue, one of the people that I would have listed, I probably would have said Walter White too. But it would have been James Gandolfini as Tony Soprano. Yep. And this is where I get to tell my Tony Soprano story. Can I tell it now, my Gandolfini story?
I'm sure it's 1,000 times better than my Gandolfini story, so go for it.
All right, here's my Gandolfini story, which other people, I don't know if I told it on podcast before.
Ooh, exclusive.
But I tell people in real life. Yeah, exclusive.
Ratings gold.
You can put this in the Instagram post.
We're going to get 2 more listeners.
Anyway, so I told you I worked at World of Video, and I grew up in Jersey. My father grew up in Jersey. My mother grew up in Jersey. My father's parents are from Ireland, and they settled in South Orange, and my dad grew up in and around South Orange. And when he was a kid, he was, let's just say, friends with many people who were in this thing that we have. And that was a big part of his life growing up. And I heard many stories about that. And then when The Sopranos came out, I mostly, because I hadn't really watched it, wasn't watching TV, my dad watched it. And he was like, you got to watch The Sopranos. I was like, oh, I'm sure you love that show. He's like, Billy, you don't understand. You need to watch this show. And when I started watching The Sopranos what was it, about last week, I started kind of watching in preparation for this pod. I'm flooded with memories of not only New Jersey, but my father too, because in many ways, my father was Tony Soprano in many ways. He wasn't Tony Soprano, but he acted very much like this character in just the way any room he walked into, he took it over. And he also talked like that too. I was just talking to my friend Arif about how my dad used to tell me when he was a kid, all the Irish kids wanted to be Italian. That was the cool thing to be. And just like in The Sopranos, Melfi always talks about how, oh, you Italian, she says to her ex-husband, you Italian boys, you love those freckles, right? Like you like the Irish girls. Right. And growing up in Jersey in the time that my dad did, approximately the same age as Tony in this show, maybe a little bit older, he would often talk about all that. And so years go by. I know I have this connection to The Sopranos, my dad in Jersey. And I'm drinking with my dad one night, and he tells me a story he'd never told me before. And he said, I never told you this before, but I know Gandolfini. And I was like, yeah, whatever, Dad, because my dad has, just like Tony Soprano and many people from New Jersey, he's full of stories. Everything was a big story. Oftentimes when I think about my father, I think about that movie Big Fish, right? Because he was Irish too, so he had that storytelling gene. Right. And, he's kind of drinking, and he said, look, I'll tell you this story. It's a sad story. So anyway, it so happens that my father ran this place called The Manor in South Orange. It's actually mentioned quite often in The Sopranos. Awesome. I don't know if you know, but like a lot of times they're like, brunch is at The Manor, or they're going to somebody's wedding at The Manor. Right. My dad used to run The Manor. He was the general manager. A guy named Wayne Knowles owned it. And they actually helped find a doctor that did an operation for me when I was a kid that saved my life, but that's another story. So anyway, my father hired this girl named Lynn to work at The Manor, and she had a friend named James, and in walks this big, tall dude with a red afro, and it was James Gandolfini, because when he was a kid, he had a big red afro. And my father and him immediately became friends because my father and myself, two redheads. So the Ginger clan is always, we always get together. And Lynn and Tony James were dating. And Lynn worked as a server, and my father was friends with her. And he wasn't that much. He would, like I said, he was a little bit older than them, maybe 4 or 5 years, 6 years older than them. Lynn and James and my dad used to hang out all the time, and they'd bring their friends there and, do whatever they do. It also so happened that the Manor was a hangout for organized crime in New Jersey as well. And so in some interviews, I think Gandolfini made reference to it. Well, anyway, one night, Lynn was driving home from the Manor. She got into a car accident and died. And James Gandolfini was dating her, came into the Manor and, my father consoled him. And she had a twin sister who he actually started dating after she died, which is a common thing that happens, I think. And they were young. And it actually is. I was reading about it afterwards. I read an article about it. It's a common thing. And that was the last time my father ever saw him, because he never wanted to come back to the Manor because of this great loss. I didn't know why my father told me that story, but I find out years later that after he tells me that Gandolfini mentioned her when he won, I think, the Emmy. At the end of his speech, he says, "This is for Lynn," which was kind of like the love he had considered to be one of the loves of his life. So I was still working at World of Video at the time, and one of the members of World of Video was James Gandolfini. He had been coming into World of Video when I worked there. I hadn't known this story before. Actually, that may have been the impetus for my father telling me this story, was that, "Hey, Dad, I saw Gandolfini in the store again." And I used to help Gandolfini and his son because they would ride up on a motorcycle and jump off of it. This big dude on a motorcycle was funny as hell, but it almost looked like he was in Italy, or maybe it was, I can't remember if it was a motorcycle or if it was a scooter, because he was so huge you couldn't tell the difference. Right. And when he came into the store, and this didn't happen with anybody else, because this was the kind of place, and you're a New Yorker, there's just some places where you're in New York, no matter what, there's just always like incredible, famous or legendary people around you. And it's not like Tom Cruise or this or that, like LA. It's like some artist, right? Or politician or writer, or it's just, you have no idea who you're talking to. And this would happen to me every fucking day. But then it would be like nothing. I'm not a person who is like readily impressed by meeting a famous person. Mm-hmm. So I was just like, okay, Gandolfini comes in the store. But I'm getting both my stories out at once here. Yeah. Forgive me if I'm monopolizing your podcast.
It's okay. That's usually what I do, so I can't really complain. just be prepared that there's going to be a lot more of me, sure.
Okay.
Go on. I want to hear the rest. I want to hear this.
The one thing about Gandolfini is, like I said, there are many famous people that came in. And all of us, there's some people, like when Tarantino came in, we'd be like, oh, fuck, it's Quentin Tarantino, But we'd still talk to him and help him out and get videos, and we'd chat with him and everything. But Gandolfini was a different story. And the reason why is because you mentioned how a person inhabits the role. And let me tell you that he was Tony Soprano. He wasn't an asshole. He wasn't a murderer. He was a kind, gentle, big bear of like the sweetest dude. He was an actor. He was an artist. But his physical presence and the breathing would freak people out. Right. Like he would walk around the store and you'd be like, hey, you got that over there? Like, and the accent wasn't even that thick because he laid on the accent, even though he was Jersey. But in normal speak, and I have kind of a accent, so when I start talking, usually I can kind of bring it out in people. But he was really, it actually frightened me. And I was not the only one, because I asked other people who worked there. I was like, look, man, is it me? Like, I don't, I think I was talking to my friend Devin, and I was like, Devin, we don't give a fuck. All these famous people come in and we don't care, but they're here all the time. But this guy freaks me out, but he's such a nice guy. And he was like, Tony fucking Soprano. And I was like, that's what it is. I just can't. Couldn't separate it. And he was the sweetest. I can't describe what maybe that made it more alarming is that he was so sweet, and he just constantly had his arm around his son the entire time they were in the store. Like, he wouldn't let the kid go, which also reminded me, because my father was like that too. But he was always holding his hand, and even as years went on, and I think that I stopped working there in maybe 2006 or so, but I'd always come back. He always had that type of personality. And so to end this story, after my father told me this story, he came in the store again, of course. And I said to him, hey, Mr. Gandolfini, I just want to tell you, I know I never mentioned it to you, but my father is Ray Foley. You knew him. And he goes, oh, Ray, the Manor. Yeah. And I said, yeah. And I was like, I just wanted to tell you that he told me to tell you that he's very proud of you and that he thinks you deserve all the success that you're having. And he was like, he shook my hand and kind of came in, gave me like a little like half hug thing, Oh. And he was like, well, tell him I said the same. That's great. And I thought that was really sweet, because I was a little worried, because I'm obviously bringing up a part of his life. He never saw my father again after that. His girlfriend died. I was worried that he was going to be kind of like, yeah, thanks, kid,
Right.
He was really sweet about it. And that just goes to tell you my own little impression of him. And just dealing with him as a guy who worked at a video store that he came into, was that he was such a sweet, like a real artistic soul. You could kind of tell, and even when we talked about some films and stuff, and I think his last film that he did with Julia Louis-Dreyfus was absolutely amazing, and was just showed the tip of what he was capable of as an actor past this Tony Soprano character.
Right.
And I think if he had lived on, Eric, I should say.
Just Scott. Do not call me Scott, Eric. Just Scott.
Okay, sorry, Scott. You should know. I think that he would have been. We would have known him as Tony Soprano, but I think he would have had many other roles, and even other like career-defining roles. Mm-hmm. I just think he was I can't talk about how much I think he was such a great actor. But even past Tony Soprano.
Oh yeah. Well,
that's my story. I even got a little choked up just thinking about all that shit.
I noticed that. And I think I'm going to actually have to make that an entire segment on its own. I'm going to have to do like a segment breakdown because of the magnitude of that story. Very impressive. I don't have a story even remotely as interesting as that, so I'll just do it in 10, 30 seconds, whatever. I spent half my life working in the stock photo industry in one form or another. Most of it based in one office that was called Bettman or Bettman News Photos or the Bettman Archive, which eventually got bought by Corbis, which was a Bill Gates company. We were competitors with the main competitors with Getty. A lot of people out there have heard of Getty Images. Of course,
Getty Images,
But we were the original. We were the ones that had UPI. We were the ones who had the better historical editorial photography. I think it was around 2000 or so, if I'm not mistaken. Occasionally we'd have clients come into the office, but they were usually people, freelancers working on behalf of whatever. It could be, usually it could be a book client or something like that, because advertising clients usually didn't come into the office. We just did the research for them and sent out stuff, whatever. And every once in a while something odd would happen. There might be a certain person might show up and be like, oh, that's interesting, like when Bill Gates showed himself because he had just bought us or whatever. Oh, there's Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Gandolfini came to our office. He made an appointment because he wanted to do research and look at different photography connected to it was like military photos. And it turned out he was just wanted to bone up on his history for a role he was about to take in some movie. I think the movie was the one he did with Robert Redford. I think it's called like The General or The Castle. The Castle.
Yes.
So think about, for us here, when we're on, this is when I'm still circulating the tapes or people are still watching, whatever. And also we find out Gandolfini's actually coming to the office. And much like you said, he's got that presence about him. So you're just kind of like, oh my gosh, we would walk by and it's like, oh my God, he's huge, but I didn't
felt it too.
Yeah. I didn't have any personal although I do have really great celebrity stories where I had personal interactions. That's not one of them, but I did see him. I walked by him a bunch of times, but I didn't want to be, I'm never the type who's going to be like, oh, I got to keep taking a look at him. It's like, all right, that's cool. He's here. Let's leave him be. That's what makes New York cool. We don't care that much. We're like, oh, that's cool. And then we move on. The thing that reminded me of your story with the video store that comes to my mind for some reason, especially when you said when you run into just your random, more artistic people, was I used to go when I worked in that same office, a couple blocks away, there was a comic store I went to every Wednesday. Cosmic Comics was on 23rd Street. That's where we got our Wednesday, comics, whatever. And if you went to a comic book store, and you were a regular there, that means you also gave them like your birth date, and they would keep track of everything you were purchasing. And every time you spend like $100, you might get like another $20 off whatever you're going to buy next, that kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
So I go in there one time and I'm, and then it's like people are giving their numbers, whatever. And I think it was like my birthday, which by the way is coming up in about a week. And there was someone ahead of me. I was like, well, that's my number. And I was like, oh, that's my number. What are you talking about? And I look and it's this really, really tall, really, really gaunt, thin person. I could see that before he even turns around. And as he's turning around, I realize who it is before I even see his face. It's like, and I'm like, oh my God, you're Rick Ocasek.
Oh, wow.
And he's exactly what and keep in mind, cameras add weight. So imagine what he looks like when you've watched all those music videos. And then, imagine that. Now subtract about 40 pounds off of that.
Ooh, man.
Because it was just amazing because I just like, of course, I'm like, oh, I'm a huge fan of your music, sir. It's like, oh, thanks. Hey, we share the same birthday. And I actually said to him, I was like, yeah, you, me, and Kurosawa. That's great.
That's awesome.
Because I know Kurosawa also share the same birthday. All right. Anyway, so now we'll shift back to the TV show. I think we both have been binging on at least a number of episodes. I might have gone a little bit crazy, not as crazy as I did for a previous podcast, which was where I ended up, somehow I watched 48 episodes of Buffy before we did that podcast. I still don't know how I managed to do that. I guess I didn't sleep for like 7 days or something. The Sopranos for me, including, I kid you not, watching an episode early this morning before I started my work day, because I was like, there's one more episode I need to watch, and then I can be done with it. So I think I came in around 30 or 31 episodes, whatever. But what struck me the most was, as I was watching that first season, and as I got through it, I was thinking, this is one of the great first seasons of a television series.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
And as it moved forward, I got, episode after episode, and I was like going, I'm hard pressed to think of that many shows that are even in the same conversation. It's like, who had, the greatest first seasons of a show? I'm not saying it does have it, because I'm sure there's a couple others but it's close. I really think it's like, this is like just such a perfect first season. And and it's a season that takes its time. It builds up the characters. It builds up the storylines. It builds up the tension. It's just really strong. And I know there's shows that we're both fans of that we think of having really great first seasons. I know you mentioned you did the Lost podcast. I was a big Lost fan back in the day, at least before season 6. And I'm still a fan.
Yeah,
no, I like season 6.
I don't think Lost is. I love Lost, and I will always love Lost, and I'll always stand up for it. And I actually love that last season. There's not much about Lost that I don't love, including all the people, but I can't rank it like that because it was a network show. There's too much extra shit.
Too many episodes, right?
It's too many episodes. There's too much fluff. It's even though it's beautiful character stuff and they did their best, but I have to say you're right. I'm watching it. I'm on episode 9 or 10 right now of season 1, and I've decided now to watch the whole series.
Oh,
I did go ahead and watch Barrens. I mean, I remember I've watched the series before, but I've never done a full rewatch of the series, mostly because of the stuff I talked about before. But even past that, just like the connection, it takes me a little while to get past it all. My wife is telling me, I probably did it on the podcast, I start really talking like I'm from fucking New Jersey a lot too when I watch the show, and I become a little Italian, and it's just like overtakes me, but I'm going to do it. But Game of Thrones.
Yeah. I would say this.
I think Westworld, I mean, a lot of people are not huge fans of Westworld and the other seasons. People, I'm not going to debate, and it doesn't belong in the pantheon. I agree, but the first season is so beautiful and it works. I do think you mentioned they're all the greats, and that's why The Sopranos is one of the best shows ever.
Right. I personally wouldn't say Westworld. I think it's very pretty to look at, and it has some nice ideas, but it wavers on. Did you once say on a podcast that you love, or on a page that you love Pretentious? I seem to recall that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love
I hate Pretentious.
I can't.
I can't
stand the thing with me is I have no meter for pretense because I am just open to art, and so I let someone have pretense. If it doesn't work, I can say they didn't hit the mark, but I find it hard to call someone to find pretension because it's so hard to make shit that it's really hard to maintain that level of arrogance when you're.
Oh, see, I don't have that problem.
Awesome.
I don't have that problem. I can watch the open. I can enjoy watching. I can watch the first season of The Leftovers and say, you know what, my issues with the first season aside, whatever. That might be the most pretentious opening credit sequence I've ever seen for any show ever. So it starts off making me angry before even the show's even started.
Man, but see, that's the shit I love, dude. I mean, I'm a sucker for that, I guess.
But the thing, my issue with pretension is more directed at when something is made to feel like it's a much bigger deal or more profound than it actually could conceivably be. And it's like when people would defend something like, oh, I don't know what's something I like to beat up on all the podcasts I've ever been on. Like that horrible Ridley Scott alien whatever called movie Prometheus and everything.
Damon wrote part of that.
Guess what? I just because I'm a fan of some of their work doesn't mean they don't do bad stuff. Damon Lindelof has done lots of crap. People need to.
I know, it's true. The Hunt was really awful.
For every Watchmen and Lost, and you've got Cowboys and Aliens and Prometheus and Tomorrow. Oh God, but
I know where you're coming from. I just love the ideas from Prometheus were like, oh yeah, but
there was like a bunch of like crappy little paperbacks in the 70s that had the same idea. This isn't anything profound. I could find a random episode of In Search Of hosted by Leonard Nimoy in the 70s that was more profound than the movie Prometheus.
I know. But hey, you know what? I'll say this though, Scott. The one thing that and why I may have said that about I like pretension is because I think especially in our nation today, in our world today, there's so few people who want to create, who try to kind of just like go full out and do something. And there's so much McDonald's and so much Instagram and fake shit that I can kind of appreciate when someone tries, but I can also appreciate what you're saying, which is that is pretension, right? Like that fake shit. So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, but I am all for artistic merit and artistic expression and going there. And there are certain creators who I might initially feel the pretentious feeling about, and then after I get through it, I'm like, oh, you know what? I see what they're doing. I'm okay with this. Because one could have said that about someone like say David Lynch, for example.
Exactly.
But
And
once you
people
get past
do.
that, you're like, oh, there it is. Now I get it. I'm fine.
Now
with
you
it.
understand it.
Right.
Right. And I find that too. That's another thing, is that a lot of times, that's why I kind of give it the old college try first.
Oh yeah, I don't.
I think you do too. Obviously, you're well versed in
Right.
Many things.
And if this was a different podcast, if I had somehow sneak attacked the new one that you're doing with your friend Mike, is that his name? I can't remember the guy.
Oh, what, Falcon Winter Soldier?
Yeah, because you're gonna start doing Marvel stuff, and I watched the other one, and I went, hey, you know what you guys need? You guys need someone who's gonna like set the record straight here. I'm just kidding. How did you say all that? And DC is the one who gives the art to. Anyway, stick with The Sopranos, otherwise it's going to be 18 hours and you don't have that kind of time.
You want to know something? Is I had thought about, and maybe if you're willing to show your face, we'll have you on, because I think we're doing YouTube.
I'll think about it. I might wear a mask. like a full face mask.
Well, I don't know, go along with the show. But yeah, that stuff is fun stuff. But I like you have a good, listening to your pods, you have a good knowledge of the history of comics and stuff that I don't have. Like I said, I have, there's certain comics that I really loved, but I wouldn't call myself in no way, like, I know a lot about TV and film, but I don't know that much about comics. I knew a little bit about that Marvel LSD shit.
Right, that's a great story. That was actually one of the highlights of that podcast, I thought. I'm basic, yeah. I think my areas of expertise are like TV, movies, baseball, comics, and something I can't say on a podcast, and everything else I can't. Thankfully, I can still do that. And speaking
something that Uncle Junior got in trouble for doing.
How can you possibly know me that well? Anyway, and it's funny you just mentioned something which, nope, I'm going to wait till the end of the podcast. I'm just going to hint at a possible surprise podcast. That's why. Then it won't be a surprise. Whatever. Yeah, as far as the first season thing, I honestly, the only shows in my mind that even come close to being in that conversation are just, perfect, great first seasons. I would say even though Game of Thrones falls off after season 4, the first season I think is in that conversation.
Yeah.
I think the first season of Mad Men is in that conversation. Mm-hmm. I can't, as much as I love it, only because it got truncated, I can't include Breaking Bad because they had a truncated
That's
season.
what I was going to say, yeah.
But I could see a way to include The Wire. That would be the other one.
Definitely.
What do most of these shows have in common? They're almost all HBO shows.
Yeah. And all these best shows. But yeah, that first season was fantastic, man. It was so confident. It was so... I do want to mention one thing is... Gosh, the Goodfellas stuff in the first 2 or 3 episodes is a bit much. I mean, from the music to the angles to the camera movement to the things they say, it's just I kind of like that they leaned into it, because obviously I think it was originally sold as like Goodfellas the TV show.
Yeah.
And you have to do that, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say to that. But that's basically how they sold the show to HBO in the first place. So you have to do that, even though you realize when you get to a certain point, it's not really like the Goodfellas anymore. But It's funny you should. Oh wow, it's funny you didn't even know where I was about to go, and it's all going to coalesce in a perfect thing right here. Also funny because I think you said you're up to the 10th episode of that season.
Yes.
Funny because you're not even up to the episodes I'm about to mention. About season 1, and it's about the music, and it's about the Goodfellas, whatever. Because season 1, one of the things that stands out for me is the final 2 episodes have, in my mind, end on 2 of the best musical notes of any series ever, including The Sopranos, whatever. And it's one of those things where you realize how The Sopranos really, more so than anything else, revolutionized the use of music on TV. I mean, popular music had appeared on shows before. You can go back to, hey, I'm hearing Pink Floyd on an episode of WKRP. Or Miami Vice, obviously, was a big one with music, because they were the MTV Cops, whatever. X-Files had the occasional songs on it. But the way they used...
The Monkees.
But the way, shut up. But the way they use licensed music throughout this series and the choices that they made for specific songs to close an episode and run over the closing credits, that is like straight up cinematic shit that you had rarely, if ever, seen on television before. And they also, I mean, they did something that had almost, in fact, I will go out on a limb and say that had never been done in any TV show, maybe even movie before. There's an episode. It's the season 3 premiere. They do a mashup. They mash up, and it's used throughout the episode. They mash up the classic Henry Mancini score, Peter Gunn, with The Police's "Every Breath You Take," and it's just, and you realize, oh, it's the same. They weave into each other so perfectly. You realize they've got the same kind of bass line, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, going back to say Goodfellas, Scorsese, this is something, his influence is here because Goodfellas is the one that used, Layla in that famous sequence,
course.
Or Monkey Man when
that's it. That's him and what's her name's Shoemaker's.
Yes, I love that.
That's her thing, dude.
But television wise, the way the Sopranos did it, and the way they would, throughout their episodes, and the way they would close episodes, that led to influencing TV from that point on. Think about how many Better Call Saul episodes end with music like that.
Definitely.
Or Noah Hawley's series like Legion or Fargo all do that.
How about the Americans?
Oh, the Americans. The U2 song. Oh, that alone.
Yeah.
Oh, so
we
good.
cover Mindhunter, which uses great music throughout. Oh, and I think really this is a result of. Have you watched Mindhunter? Are you a Mindhunter fan?
2 of our best podcasts we ever did were on the 2 seasons of Mindhunter. I put them in our top. I put them on our. Then I don't know if Mount Rushmore can have 10. They're in our Mount Rushmore podcast. The first one especially. Ooh, it's so good. Ooh.
I like it. But I was going to say, I think a lot of this is a result of HBO giving them the budget.
Yes. It's budget is always a big thing for this kind of.
And giving them a music budget, which is something that you didn't. I mean, and you see it. And there's other shows, Wonder Years. Like you think about shows that most of the time you'll know these shows because why? Because when they came out on VHS or DVD, they couldn't use the songs.
That's right.
Because they didn't have the rights, right?
I mean, you can't get a decent DVD of WKRP because they wouldn't allow the licensing. They talk about a Pink Floyd song on the episode, and now that conversation means nothing because they can't play the song. When you're watching it, Arthur Carlson comes on and asks about what is it that Johnny's playing, and he's playing something off of Dark Side of the Moon. But yeah, it's often a budget thing. I mean, that was that famous Mad Men episode where they licensed a Beatles song, "Tomorrow Never Knows," and just to get the rights for a Beatles song alone was a near miracle. And then you realize how much money they had to spend. And it's an AMC show. It's amazing. The network with the 2 of the best looking shows of all time, or I guess 3 now, also has the shortest budgets. So it's amazing what Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, and Mad Men have always been able to accomplish. But the famous thing about that episode is that Don Draper puts it on and he has it on for maybe, 20, 30 seconds tops. And then he just takes it off. It's showing how Don does not evolve. And Matthew Weiner was all about, okay, but we're going to play the entire song.
To the end, though.
Yeah, we're going to play the entire song over all the credits because we want to get our money's worth since we paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to use this song. The one thing I want to say about what this show does, there's 2 things more I want to say about music that I think are of note here, which are different than what anyone would ever think. And what makes the Sopranos that more special a show, and what David Chase is able to accomplish because he plays a major part in selecting the music. Usually when you think of someone scoring something, whether it be a TV show or a movie, you're figuring, they're just, they're picking all these great, cool songs. It's the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack or whatever. What they do in The Sopranos, and they make a point of this, they don't always want to pick songs that are good. Sometimes they want to pick songs that people don't like, that are crappy, and they say that deliberately. Like, no, we don't want it. We don't want it to be, because then otherwise it'll always be distracting. We want to sometimes have pieces of music that people don't specifically like, but it's the right music for the right scene, and it just works better. And that's kind of different than
it's culturally relevant.
Yeah. So as opposed to, your Tarantino soundtracks or your Gardens, where it's so cool, now I want to go out and buy it. There's certain songs you'll hear in the Sopranos episode like, well, I never want to hear that song ever again. The other thing, which I didn't know until the last week, was, everybody knows the famous song for the opening credits of The Sopranos. Woke up this morning, got myself a gun. It's one of those iconic opening credit sequences, quite frankly, like many HBO opening credits, whatever. What I didn't know is, because I knew that was like some little band no one had heard of, Alabama 3 or something, right? They almost went with a different song. They almost picked an Elvis Costello song to be the opening credits week after week for The Sopranos. The song, and then they actually ended up using the song in the third episode. So you've actually heard it then. It was the song that ended the third episode. It's called Complicated Shadows. That was almost going to be the opening credit song for The Sopranos. And if you ever, guys, go out to your Spotify's, your YouTubes or whatever, listen to that song, you'll realize, oh yeah, I could see it. Because the lyrically, they even mention gangsters in the song and about, being in the shadows and all this stuff. And the musical cues, like, oh yeah, I could see it. I think they made the right choice, as much as I do love Elvis Costello. But I remember thinking, wow, that would have been interesting, because as legendary an artist as Elvis Costello is, how much money would he have been in pocketing just from The Sopranos after all?
And also, like you said, the song that starts the Sopranos theme song, and I don't want to offend anyone here, it's not a great song. It's kind of cheesy. I always kind of liked it because it's very Jersey to me. I don't think it's a great song. I think the production on it is kind of cheese bomb, like with the quack, 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 like the sound effects in the background. And I don't know. Look, maybe that's just me. Yeah, maybe other people have written dissertations about how amazing this song is, but I always thought that was a little bit of kitsch. And there's so much of kitsch and like that Italiano kitsch too in The Sopranos itself that it really fit for me. And I just also have to mention that opening, when I can't even watch that damn The Sopranos, because I've ridden those roads so many fucking times that when I watch The Sopranos opening, I feel like I'm going to get into a traffic jam and be stuck on the turnpike for like 3-4 hours for no reason. And then he's driving through like Clifton and Kearney and Lodi and all these shitty places in New Jersey that I spent like, oh my God, my friend Lou used to live in Clifton. So much time in it, especially going to Jets games too. You ride around it like that. And his house in the show, where does he live again in the show? What fucking town does he live in?
Oh, good Lord. They say it a billion times.
It's not Lodi. It's
I can't remember. I didn't have a reason to write it down.
Okay, wait. It's because I know that it's right next to, it's west, whatever. I grew up more towards Union. I grew up in Union County. Let's see, hometown, Tony Soprano's town. But anyway, my ex-girlfriend used to live, let's see. The town is actually Tony Soprano's house. Come on. You're not even going to tell me where it is. Anyway, I had an ex-girlfriend who lived right around there, and all those McMansions that all look like that, and they have a pool in the back, and they have all these god-awful marble tower, like
I'm familiar with it. They're not just in New Jersey.
Oh, I know.
I
know, my friend.
I'm in South Brooklyn. Trust me, I'm familiar. Yes. I'm familiar with a few of these.
But that whole what is it? West Caldwell? I think maybe it was that where it was. What town? Oh, it's North Caldwell. Yeah, it was North Caldwell. So I knew people from out there, and like I said, my ex-girlfriend lived there. I remember the first time we pulled up into her house, and I was like, "What do you live at fucking Tony Soprano's house?" And she started laughing, and she's like, "Yeah, we all talk about that." But just like the little school that that Meadow goes to, which is based on a lot of those day schools that are in that part of Jersey. And when I moved to Jersey City, I lived across the street from that Paul Bunyan thing that's in the beginning. You know, the guy, it was like a lumber yard. Right under the Pulaski Skyway. So I lived right off the Pulaski Skyway next to the cemetery that's right there in Jersey City. And right around the corner was Tony's. They don't use it that often. I think they used it more in season 1. It was the garbage dump or the recycling place that he owned.
Right.
And they use it more in the first, but that was like, I could look out my window and see that place. I just went down memory lane again. But
see, I need that. I need that. I need that.
The opening to be kind of cheesy and funny at the same time. But
see, I love that the same person who extols, actually it's perfect. The person who embraces the pretentious and then knocks the Sopranos opening for being cheesy. It's perfect.
But I love it though. I don't think
it's your brand.
Any other way. Because I think that
it's New Jersey gangsters. It would be weird to do it any other way. You're right. I got it.
But it could have been a bunch of shots sitting outside the deli. It could have been a bunch of Christopher going and jumping out of a car, right? You know what I mean? It could have been.
Yeah, they tend to, HBO opening sequences tend to shy away from using stuff from the actual show.
Yes. But I just like the fact that it was his journey kind of through Jersey, and at a certain point you think he might be, you're not quite sure, like, where's he coming, where is he coming out of one of the tunnels? Like when he first starts driving, where does he start?
I always had the impression he was coming back from New York when he's
so that's driving. The impression people have, but I don't know
but I don't know that it's true.
Yeah, I think he was coming from like Montclair or something.
I don't.
He was driving up from there.
I'm not really sure.
I don't think he was coming from New York.
I don't know.
He doesn't go in a particular way either, because he goes he kind of goes off and goes into like Kearney and stuff, and then he goes up and over, and he's like near the Meadowlands, even though that is near there, but you wouldn't really go that way.
It's for you, especially Mr. Jersey guy, either you or just contact him. You just have to figure out the bridge and toll that he goes through at the start, and then you'll know where he's coming from, and then you can figure the rest out.
Probably could figure. Actually, while I'm watching the show, and I suggest this to anyone watching, there's a fantastic website just called Sopranos Locations. And for every scene in the show, you can see where they were.
Oh, yeah.
And where it was shot. And it is great fun to me because I'm always recognizing places. And it's fun to look and see if I'm right.
Oh, I definitely can understand it. What's fun for me, it's just, it helps me to add to my list of all the reasons why I don't want to go to New Jersey. So, there we go, because I'm a New Yorker. Anyways.
It's so funny. You know what? Now, when I moved out of Jersey, I initially moved out of Jersey to move into New York against my better judgment. And I lived in New York for 2 years, and then I moved, and then I lived in Durham, North Carolina, and then I lived out here, and I haven't lived in New Jersey since 2006 or 2007, maybe.
Oh, that's what you said before.
But once you move out, that whole Jersey, New York thing disappears because you just see that's your brothers. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you can make fun of your brother, but when someone else does, you get pissed at them.
Yes, I understand it. I get it. Yeah,
so I don't feel that New York thing that you might feel because you're in New York right now, that kind of shit on Jersey. Like, trust me, I know that. I lived in Jersey City.
It's just fun. And a lot of my friends moved to New Jersey and whatever. My only issue in New Jersey is not even a real issue. It was just funny for me listening to you talk about the drive and the this and that.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, okay, keep in mind you're talking to the people out there, so it's fine. But the person who's on the other end of this microphone, I don't drive. So, which is funny because every screenplay I write, the main characters are driving all the time, but I've never driven a car in my life. So I don't relate to anything about that. I'm usually like, I'm just,
That's a big part of The Sopranos too. Tony's always they're always doing all these shots of people driving places,
Absolutely.
And that's a lot of your life in Jersey.
So based on all the conversation on driving, I think I'm going to dump out one of the segments I had originally planned for the podcast, which was going to be talking about the actual series finale, which in itself is rather notable or polarizing or whatever. Maybe, but I'm thinking at this point, if we get into that, we haven't even gotten to Pine Barrens yet. It's going to be a 1,000,000-hour podcast, and David Gott would appreciate that, but I'm still like...
My son's being good, so we're okay. We can keep talking.
Well, we can do it really briefly. The only thing I wanted to say about the series finale, because it's one of those things that when people talk about The Sopranos... Oh, by the way, I will mark this on the segment thing. If for somehow there's someone listening to this podcast who doesn't know how The Sopranos ends... Hopefully they'll have seen this on the chapter list and they'll just skip this. Even though I think you have to have been living under a rock the size of Bobby Bacala to not to know how The Sopranos ended at this point. Yes. It's too famous not to know at this point. What I'm going to say about it, and now I'm tasked to keep it even briefer than the usual Scot length of things. I have said when I initially saw it, I had a negative reaction to it. And then I fired off. I wrote some piece about it and fired it off and put it into the ionosphere or webosphere, whatever. Months later, I did a complete rewatch of the show because I had bought the season after season. I was waiting for that last season to come out on DVD, and I watched them all back to back to back. And when I watched it all together, I went, okay, 180-degree turn time. I think this is a great ending. I think it works so well compared to the polarizing endings of certain other shows. Lost. But we're not going to talk about last year. Anyway, but I kept thinking about it, and it's like, no, it's the right way to end this series and this specific episode. And I know that people who to this day don't like it. There's a lot of people, when they watch a series and we get to the end of it, they are hoping or wishing or wanting for some sort of closure. And whether the resolution of not just a storyline, but perhaps even a character's life. So when you're watching a show like, whether it be The Sopranos or The Shield or Breaking Bad, or whatever, when you're dealing with a show where the main character is at best an anti-hero, if not, basically a villain at this point.
A total scumbag?
Right, exactly. Whether they should get their just desserts, whether whatever, blah, 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 blah. And each of those three shows handle it in a different way. The thing about The Sopranos, as opposed to, say, The Shield or, say, Breaking Bad, is, and why I actually compare it more, why I think it compares more favorably or in a similar fashion to a show like Mad Men, The Sopranos to me, and again, I've just watched 30-something episodes of it, so now my memory's all on fire about it. While there is plotting going on here, I don't look at The Sopranos as being a very plot-driven, plot-heavy show.
No.
I mean, and I know there's a lot of people out there when they watched, especially when it was on, because they latched onto the whole mobster aspect of it. So that's what that's where they were looking for the kill of the week. They wanted their bloodlust satisfied.
Or I think they were looking to get from The Sopranos, even though it was later, the same type of political gamesmanship that you find in, say, like Game of Thrones or The Wire or something of that nature, where there was an examination of the system.
Right.
And though The Sopranos is, in a sense, of course, an examination of the system of the mafia and whatnot. And the whole basis of it is that they were coming in at the end, Mm-hmm. You're right. It's about the characters. So a lot of the things, like, for instance, in this episode, Pine Barrens, right?
Mm-hmm.
You never hear from this Russian dudes again.
That's right.
Neither of them.
What David Chase does with both that aspect of the Pine Barrens of Pine Barrens, Pine Barrens, or the finale is, he's smart enough to know what instinctively the audience wants. That doesn't mean it's what they should be getting,
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of subverts, more traditional storytelling in that sense. He's not writing just to make you happy or just to make himself happy. He's writing to the truth of the show and what it's really about. The Russian thing, could they have done that? Could there have been a hint or something, and we've seen that character pop up again, or even play a part as far as a major plotting issue in subsequent episodes? They could have went there, but they didn't. And it's funny because
not just the Russian who gets away, but what was the guy's name? Valvo, or his boss?
Well, his boss's name is Slava.
Slava. Okay, right. He never has trouble with him about this. Like it doesn't come up, and that's just an example of what I'm saying is when I started rewatching just even this season, I said, hey, the one thing that I didn't super pay attention to the first time I watched The Sopranos was this plotting. Like if, little Bobby killed the big pussy in the baklava, like all this shit, like all these guys' names and all the families and how New York ties in and all that kind of shit. And as I'm watching it, I realized to myself, okay, you can pay attention to that stuff, but it wasn't something big that I was missing. Right. I paid attention enough. I remembered enough. It was not this deep thing this vein that I thought I needed to tap. Right. And I was kind of happy about that because, like you say, this show is known really for it being an intensely humanistic, beautiful examination of a man, of many women, of people, of culture, of society. It's super deep and psychological. It's not,
right. And
a gangster show.
And that's why it is
a gangster show.
Right. And it's a show where they happen to be gangsters.
Exactly.
But that's not what it, and with a show like this, and I guess there were some people because they had watched it for, at that point for 8 years, and they feel when you've invested that kind of time in something, they feel whether it's necessary or not, they feel there should be like a need for closure. And my issue with that is that's nice. And there are stories that lend themselves to that. The way Breaking Bad ends, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whatever.
The Shield.
Or the Shield. The Shield, brilliant ending.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Might be my favorite. I've talked about it a million times before. But the thing with The Sopranos and certain other shows it's realizing that these are characters that are going to be living on, or might be living on, past those final credits. And if the plotting of the series didn't dictate that there had to be a more definitive outcome or consequence, then why are you expecting that? The fact that there is this essentially, and this is the episode I actually watched this morning, so it's really fresh in my head. Him doing that smash cut to black when Tony looks up hearing the bell ring of the door or something, and the song suddenly abruptly ends in the middle of the song. Yes, one could say, you ended it on a cliffhanger. It's like, well, you can perceive it that way. That's kind of one of the interesting things about it. It's like choose your own adventure. It's like, decide what you want this to mean. Do you think that the guy who was in the members only jacket went to the bathroom? Could he have been someone? Are those two African American gentlemen? Could they be someone? Could it be nothing? What he's doing here is, this is a snapshot of this man and this family's life right now. That at any given moment, something like that could happen. Because earlier in the episode, we see how the other mobster, the Phil Leotardo character, just happened to be at a gas station with his family, and all of a sudden he's abruptly murdered, just like that. That's a parallel to what we see with Tony here, and it doesn't mean they have to do that, but it's just an indication it could happen, or not.
Yeah, it's the life.
Yeah, this is the life we've chosen,
Hey, man, listen, this is what I have to say. If anyone is... If at this point, and I don't know how many of them are left, if somebody is really disappointed about that, then you really need to go back and rewatch the show. It's the same thing, and I don't want to insult you because there are problems with season 6 of Lost. But as far as the ending goes, or insofar as both Damon and Carlton expressing that the show be about the characters, not the plots, right?
Right.
I feel that holds true for The Sopranos too. I remember I was sitting with my wife, my brother and sister-in-law, and my mother-in-law in Greensboro, North Carolina, watching this finale. And when it cut out, I knew exactly what the fuck he did. I didn't think the cable went out. and I laughed, and I had tears rolling down my face, honestly, because I thought it was pure genius. And I felt this utter sense of like gratitude to David Chase and to everyone on The Sopranos for having the cojones to do that. And it was beautiful, and I understood it implicitly, and I think a lot of people did. And I think it was absolutely beautiful. Whether it was a guy in the members only jacket, I'll tell you who I think it was. Are you ready?
The one with the baseball team?
No, it was the Russian that got away.
Oh, God damn it.
He finally came out of the Pine Barrens. He was like, what the fuck am I doing in South Jersey? And he got as fast as he could to North Jersey.
Yeah, my feeling is maybe I wasn't as heavily focused or invested in the show when I watched it initially, and thus I was more taken aback by the ending. But then when I chose to do a rewatch, and I therefore spent more time with the characters and really focused on it more, I was able to appreciate it and then embrace it the way
That's why I was at. Right. I understand what you're saying. I mean, that's so much of watching anything, The Observer, right? So your state of mind. And I think I was in that state of mind of feeling that show, and the tension that they create in the last season is very much akin to the end of Goodfellas with the helicopters and the snorting. Right. You did feel that every scene, I felt like Tony was going to get whacked or somebody was going to get whacked. And I just thought it was brilliant. And I think in many ways, this episode, why I think Pine Barrens is so famous of an episode of The Sopranos is because the Russian gets away. And because the show ended with people saying, did the guy in the members only jacket or those younger dudes take Tony out, or did they just, finish their meal and get up and leave?
Yeah.
I think the connection between these two episodes is in that mystery.
Yes.
And it keeps alive. I love this episode because I'm looking at the notes and I think we're about to get onto it.
Yes, we are.
I love this episode. But I don't know whether I think this is the best Sopranos episode or even one of the best episodes. I have no problems with the episode. I absolutely love it. It is definitely, when you go and you look online with some of my former coworkers at the Star Ledger, Alan Sepinwall and Matt Zoller Seitz, who are wrote that Sopranos book, right? Mm-hmm. And they were so nice to me when I worked at the Star Ledger. I always like to give them a shout out because not only are those dudes super awesome and have become so successful, but when I was just a kid working at the Star Ledger as an editorial assistant, those were like the two dudes that would talk to me, especially Matt. He was really cool because I love TV and I used to talk to him about it a lot. But people always write about the Pine Barrens episode. I think because it has these intertwining storylines. It has great examples of the kind of obtuse nature of the scenes and cutting that The Sopranos does, where you're in the middle of some scene and then all of a sudden, you go to Christopher and Paulie just pull into a parking spot. And then it cuts back to Tony. There's just all this I love they always did that in The Sopranos. The way they paced things was almost to create a dreamlike or a more natural sense of things. But this episode, I think it's that mystery And now, even as I talk about it, I can convince myself of why it's such a great episode, because there's so many little mysteries within this story that is so primal.
Well, it's funny. I would say over the past month and a half, maybe, I've brought this podcast up with a few people, the countdown nature of it. And when I mentioned that I was actually getting kind of excited because we're getting close to talking about The Sopranos, as I mentioned, a show we've never had the opportunity to talk about at length on this podcast. So 3 different people, totally different walks of life, ages, genders, and so on. I kid you not. The first thing each of those 3 people said, paraphrasing was, so it's going to be Pine Barrens, right?
Yeah.
And because I always think, you can certainly, I'm kind of sort of there with you to a certain degree. You can certainly point to a number of really great Sopranos episodes that, maybe that would have been ones that would come to my mind first. But a lot of times those episodes, I think they often tend to be referred to as the one where, like the one where so-and-so gets whacked, or the one where, the one where he's having the dream, or the one, whatever, that kind of stuff.
Right.
What's more fascinating about this episode and the near universal love of this episode, and it may very well be the things you've mentioned already, is unlike the vast majority of Sopranos episodes, the Tony storyline is not the one that gets the most attention or huzzas about it, even though he does have a very meaty storyline. Hey, see what I did there? Meaty, because he gets it with the London broil. By the way, London broil, that's something we all got. I remember in the 90s, but I was talking to someone the other day. I was like, have you ever seen London broil on the menu when you go to a restaurant in the States? But no, but we always get London broil when we go to the supermarket. What's the deal with London broil? Anyway.
Does that even exist outside of the East Coast? Is that a thing?
Is it the steak version of Entenmann's? I'm wondering.
I don't know. Sometimes when you leave your area, you go and you find like cuts of meat and stuff. People have like a different kind of name for it.
I think that I'm suspicious that might be it. Before we go any further about the episode, it's amazing we finally got to it. A lot of times when I talk about episodes, I do like to kind of mention a little bit about the writing and directing credits, which is very important for this episode, because it's also significant about the show itself. First of all, this episode, because I always lead off with who wrote it, because, writer here, I always go to the writer first. There's an episode written by Terrence Winter, now, which is kind of significant. Now, with The Sopranos, there's a few series out there that are famous for begatting some really great writer-creators. The X-Files gave us Vince Gilligan, or The Shield gave us Kurt Sutter, or whatever. I think The Sopranos kind of tops them all. Because you got this show, you got this episode, Terrence Winter. He went on to write and create Boardwalk Empire. Then you've got, we already mentioned, of course, the one I would have ended with, Matthew Weiner, who goes from the world of mobsters to the world of advertising with Mad Men. He went on to create Mad Men. And you also got Todd Kessler, who went on to write and create shows like Damages and Bloodline. That's 3 huge heavy hitters that came out of The Sopranos. That's very impressive. That makes me think when you go to my show of shows back in the 50s and you saw the talent that was on that staff. Oh, it's Larry Gilbart and it's Woody Allen, it's Mel Brooks. It's kind of like that for TV. It's a murderer's row of great talent.
And there's probably more. And then there's like Tim Van Patten, who did so many great shows, directed so much great stuff.
Although there's several different directors who we associate quite often with HBO series as well as others, whether it be Alan Coulter or this one or that one, I always think Timothy Van Patten, who was Salami on The White Shadow, for God's sake, which I always love the fact that he's Salami from The White Shadow. A very good show, by the way. I think he's like the HBO standard bearer. He's like the gold standard. It's like, if you see an episode that's directed by Timothy Van Patten, okay, it's not going to be bad.
Did he do the Game of Thrones pilot?
I'm not sure. It might have been him, or it might have been David Nutter, because he directs the pilots for every show. I'm not sure.
It might have been, but I know because they reshot that whole. They took it away from what's his name, Thomas McCarthy.
Oh. What, they Zack Snyder him? Anyway, so,
Oh.
and speaking of, no, we're not going to go there. Don't. 'Cause I'll shred you just on the incel thing alone. All right. Speaking of directed,
Good job.
yeah, I know, because it's the Marvel universe that's got all the incel fans.
They all
Anyway,
right about that.
well, Star Wars is the worst, though.
Totally right.
But speaking of directing, the fact that this was directed by Steve Buscemi.
Yep.
Which is amazing. He's clearly channeling his inner Coen brothers here, with, everything from Fargo to Miller's Crossing, which, he was in both of those, whatever. And you kind of think, oh, maybe his collaborating with Terrence Winter with this episode might have been one of the main things that led to him getting the lead in Boardwalk Empire, years later for Terrence Winter. So, anyway, a lot of times when we've profiled a more serialized drama episode for the countdown, I always thought it was like a good idea to set the stage for what had been going on in the season for that point. Because in some cases, I think it's totally necessary. I don't really think it's all that necessary for this episode and this season. It
really isn't. You were right about that. I had forgot, and you mentioned that to me, and I rewatched it, and I said to myself, no. You were right. It really is not. It's not a bottle episode, but it feels that way in a sense that things progress in the overall plot, right. But you very easily know where you are.
Right. I mean, the convenience of that season was that Chase was really more interested in interpersonal relationships and family more than mob intrigue anyway, and he really shifted even further in that direction when you got to season 3. So, yeah, you go into this episode. Yeah, you should know that Tony's now cheating on his wife with a different woman who is yet another high maintenance domineering type. Tony being attracted to that type, they're the shocker, And now we're finally getting into Meadow's dating now. That's really all you need for this episode. That's all you need to know. You don't even need to know that, hey, Joey Pants joined the cast and he's Ralphie Cifarello now, because every season they have to have one, psycho crazy guy who comes on the show and eventually gets killed off at some point by the end of the season. He's like Ralph Richie Abril in season 2. But this one, it was really more about just like those relationships that we're talking about. And that's kind of when you get to this episode, you really only have like 3 major story threads in this episode. The Tony stuff, which is Tony and Gloria, Tony Carmela, Tony Dr. Melfi, the little thing with Meadow and Jackie Jr. And then you get the Christopher, Paulie, and the giant Russian. What is his name? Is it like Valerie or something like that?
Yeah, Valerie.
Yep. Okay. And you think they would have played that song? No, I'm just kidding.
I was thinking of that. That's would have made sense.
But I mean, and speaking of songs, just the fact that the episode, that they have the absolute nerve to open the episode using the song Gloria as Gloria drives up.
I know. It's hilarious.
I was like, okay, this is them having a sense of humor here, and they used the original version that Van Morrison wrote when he was young, and he did with the band Them back in the early '60s.
Yep.
But I love is like she drives up with that, and we hear that song, and then when she boards the guts, and you see her then turn off the stereo, and like she's turning off the song, which I love little touches like that.
Yeah, they do that. There's another point in the episode when they're in the house and there's a Blur video playing on MTV.
Yes,
and it does a similar type of. They don't turn it off, but it does a similar type of thing where it goes from being within the context to like from without to within the film. I forget what's that called again. Exogenesis or something
I should
like
know
that,
what that
right?
is, but I can't. I still have a headache for the last 3 hours, so I can't think of what
You
it
know
is
what
right
I mean.
I know what you mean, and
It's
that's all.
context that the character as are actually hearing it. Yeah, and it's again the great music and the humor in this episode. You mentioned Buscemi, and I think that The Sopranos is always funny, and if you are, especially if you're from where we're from, on the East Coast there. You get a lot more of the little humor in it, the little lines that generally just sound, if you don't know what they're talking about, it just sounds like they're a bunch of mafioso just kind of doing their mafioso shit. But when you dial into it, it's hilarious. And I think that Buscemi helped bring the whole Paulie and Christopher thing is so funny, and it's just a comic. It's just like a comedy of errors. And they're sitting there in that. I mean, I know you want to get to maybe you want to talk about something else first, but I wanted to bring that up. That I think that Buscemi brought a real sense of humor to this, and to the way he directed it. And you can tell that he just let the actors kind of sit there a little bit. I haven't read much about the actual production of this episode, but I would gather, as in television, when they bring in a director, there's stock things, they have to do. It's got to look like The Sopranos, locations, blah, blah, blah. They're a director for hire. But they allow him to bring a style to it, which I think I can tell, especially in the Christopher and Paulie stuff, that they just turn the camera on and they let them kind of go back and forth at each other, like with what is that, a Tic Tac?
There's so much, the two of them, and he was enjoying that, and that's why I was really thinking about him drawing on his Coen Brothers experiences as well as other things.
Yep, good one.
You can totally remember like Steve Buscemi's own part in Fargo when he's partnered up with that guy who's not the most talkative of gentlemen, and he's the more chatty one of the two, and the way they interact with each other. And you kind of look at Christopher and Paulie, and they're not quite the same because these are both can be two very talkative characters, unless Paulie is going into his glower mode, which he does quite often.
I think Christopher, to me, was always a younger Paulie than he was a younger Tony.
Absolutely. Oh my God! I thought that from back in season 1, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's why I think they always butted heads, because they were too alike.
Right.
And the stuff that Buscemi brings to this, and actually Paulie reminds me a lot of. I mean, I think Buscemi could have played Paulie, and he maybe has played characters like Paulie in other movies and other things we've seen. Not Boardwalk Empire, but just the kind of fragility, the inner fragility that I think Paulie has. And I don't know, he has that kind of weird sweetness about him and how he loves his mother. I could kind of see that a little bit with Buscemi, but maybe I'm stretching there.
Maybe a little bit. The thing I really love about them in this whole and all the scenes is that you have this lovely I call it the escalating misery that they go through, because at one point there's something very cartoonishly comic about it. They're one step away from one of them looking at the other one and then becoming like a giant bowl of pasta or something, like something out of a Bugs Bunny cartoon, and then all of a sudden it becomes something that's potentially deadly serious. And I love their interactions. I think again, I haven't watched all of them in a rewatch, but I have watched, again, 30-something episodes, or like 31, whatever. This episode, to me, has some of the best work from Tony Sirico, the guy who plays Paulie, who, by the way, again, not going to have any Gandolfini-like story here, but the dude, I don't know if he's still there, but he used to live about a 10-minute walk from where I live right now. I used to see him in the neighborhood all the time. He would be driving this old, like maroon colored, one of those Cutlass Sierra things that, every other guy had, in Brooklyn in the 80s or whatever. He still had that. There was one bakery that used to be, 2 blocks from me, which is not there anymore. It was hysterical because you'd go in and, you have the whole length of the store and the counter or whatever. And they had just one picture on the wall, dead center. It looked like it could have been. I mean, it looked like it might have been something they were getting ready for. Is Wes Anderson directing this bakery, just doing this perfect symmetry, like just right dead center there? And it was a picture of Tony Sirico. And I just looked up and said, "This is such a weird neighborhood." I go to the bakery and there's a picture of this, and I go to the pet food store and they got a picture of Steven Seagal. What?
Dude,
what is going on here?
Is that a thing? That's another thing. Like, is that a thing all over the country? Because when I moved to Durham, the only place that I know that I went to had pictures of a famous person they knew was the Ricky's New York Pizza, and he had all these pictures of the guys who do that fish tank show on TLC. And I was like, I feel like I'm back in Jersey, because it was the same place. Like when I was growing up, you'd walk into a Chinese restaurant and like there'd be a picture of like Sue Simmons from Channel 5 News.
Oh my God, Sue Simmons! Oh my God!
You know, I love your whatever, right? Like,
oh yeah, we have it. I mean, I don't think it's only a New York thing. I'm sure if someone showed up somewhere else, they would, if they had a picture or whatever. But I always find it interesting when I would see that. You know, I was just picking up a burger a couple days ago in a place in Bay Ridge, or whatever, and I was waiting for it, and I looked over and I saw there was a photo that was taken of what's her name from King of Queens, Leia Remini, the one with the Scientology, and I'm like, and her being there, I was like, she was here, really? That's weird.
Oh man, Scientology! I'm obsessed with Scientology.
But the really cool thing that's no longer there, that got it closed down, it got torn down in the last couple of years. There used to be not the Nathans, but there used to be a Nathans in this neighborhood, about maybe a mile and a half from where I am right now. Nice. And I would go there, and there was one. All of a sudden, I discovered there's this one big wall there. And I think I even took a picture of it from my old Instagram account, which I can no longer access now. And it was like all these celebrities who had signed things. I mean, and I loved what was amazing about it. They were mostly like just great New York comics. Seinfeld was one of them, I'm pretty sure. It was like, David Brenner, Don Rick.
Yeah,
and I was like, wait, they were into this location? Really?
It's funny, man. I always wonder too, how do you get the picture? Do you ask for it after? Do you get the picture and then like accost them and say, hey, can you sign this and put that you like the pizza?
It's a very good question. That's why
I never do.
That's why it's interesting when you see some places where they took the picture there, and some places, it's like a publicity photo. Can I get your address? Can you send in there? Their publicists send them something like that. Because I don't think Jerry Seinfeld is walking around with pictures in his back pocket. But maybe if you're hanging out with your publicist, maybe they have headshots for. Hey, in case we go into a restaurant, bring the headshots. Whatever.
It's hilarious.
Anyway,
you were talking about Christopher and Paulie in that van and their whole journey. There was so many elements of kind of like a waiting for Godot. I think that's another thing that's fascinating about this episode, is that the idea of these two guys trapped out in the middle of the Pine Barrens, like the woods, how they relate to it. It reminded me also of, in some ways, you mentioned Kurosawa, who shares your birthday, some like old samurai movies where there'd just be like two guys ran away, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And they're like in a fire that night, and then someone approaches. There's hints of, of course, like old English tales of knights who are stranded and they're seeking out help. And I think that there's a timelessness to this episode.
Well, yes.
That really captures you, and that is not only in that story, but in the simplicity, I believe, of the Meadow Jackie Jr. story, which is so simple. It's almost like, why is this in the episode? But it does have, it has meaning.
Yes.
And even with the Tony stuff, lying to Melfi about how things are great, lying to Carmela, Gloria getting so. And I remember even when rewatching this, I remember when I first did watch this episode, thinking to myself, I didn't really like that part of it. I felt it was a little overblown. Like, what do you expect? The guy's, he's cheating on his wife. You know what I mean? Like, I found that it was a little bit much, but that's what Tony was attracted to, Right.
That's the point of it, is because everything is just a repeat of his mother.
Yeah.
And when you're with a person like that, they lack that self-awareness, and they don't see that. So either it was the Irina, the girl before her, the Russian model chick, or this one who's obviously maybe smarter, but still, at the end of the day, she still has she's classier, but she still has her issues. The thing, circling back, rewinding you like 45 seconds when you were talking about the crux of the episode as far as Christopher and Paulie and the like you mentioned, like the waiting for Godot aspect of it, which I caught on way back when as well. I remember thinking there's something so beautifully existential about this episode and how. And then even with those other storylines, you're right. They're very stripped down. That's why you really don't need to know much about the show. You don't even don't know about the show overall to get this episode. You pick up on everything pretty easily. You don't.
It's classic. I mean, I think that is overall, we're speaking in a sense to the appeal of The Sopranos itself.
Yes.
Which is, it's timeless, and it's a Shakespearean tragedy. It's a Roman tragedy. They love to talk about. That's one thing I forgot. That's one thing I forgot in this show is all the time he's like, who invented the telephone? In Italian.
Yeah, of course.
All this shit, they like the way he references Julius Caesar all the time, and all that kind of stuff. I love all that stuff. But it reminds me too of, in a sense, I think that Chase and the writers and such were going for that. They were going for something that was a moralistic tale. That's why they felt so free in bringing in all the dream-like stuff, and letting go of some plot points and really grasping on to others that sometimes people question why, right. But it's really more about the meaning and tone. That really is the genius of this show. But yeah, I was surprised too, because like the Tony Melfi and Tony Carmela stuff, just the idea of him, he's like, everything's okay. I'm lying to her, but she's believing me. Like,
what
could be wrong with that?
I think one of the things that really makes this episode stand out so much, and that's all part of it. It's all the things that the show is noteworthy for at different points in time. This episode kind of exemplifies all in one episode.
Yeah, that's a great
because
point.
It's got. I mean, there's obviously a lot of humor here. But there's also a lot of, deadly serious stuff here. There is some emotional stuff that goes on throughout this episode. There is just watching how characters kind of rationalize behavior. And The Sopranos does this more than any other show. And it reminds me, it's what I relate to in a weird way. Because I find throughout my life, especially in my later years, I always find ways to rationalize all my bad decisions and bad behaviors.
Of course.
And it can, and even when it's said out loud, it's ridiculous. But that's what we do. That's what I do. And that's what they do on this show. And it doesn't matter if you're Tony or if you're Carmela or anyone, but especially it's Tony and Carmela, because she does it just as much as he does.
Ooh, What a great performance. It's the human condition. Like Paulie would say, it's the human condition, right? Now, I just want to mention some funny lines here. Can I? Okay. First off, Paulie says, "How could we be lost? We're in New Jersey." And Christopher says, "South Jersey," which to people who don't know is I was dying. I mean, I just had to put the control down and pause the show. And I also call it when I was talking to my friend Arif, who grew up in South Jersey, and I always make fun of him when he's talking about Jersey. And I'm like, Afu, you're from South Jersey. That's not really New Jersey. But it just speaks to the other thing. I just thought it was funny when Paulie says, "Cocksucker, I got the sniffles and we're stuck out here." like, the way he's so cute, Paulie. He always says things like that. The sniffles, right?
Paulie.
When Christopher yells at him, "We should have stopped at Roy Rogers." And it was so funny.
There's a great Roy Rogers joke there. What is it about? Because Paulie actually mentions Dale Evans or something.
Oh, I don't. Because they were eating the ketchup packets. Which, by the way, I have done. I think all people did that, like in college or something. Like, let me eat some relish. And when they get into a fight, Christopher's got the gun, and he says, "I'll leave you here, you one-shoe cocksucker." This is so funny, man. This show is so great. See, you're so lucky, man, in a sense. I mean, I don't miss living in New Jersey or New York because I don't like being around a lot of people. I don't miss the traffic. But I really miss being around people who are comfortable at just saying shit like that to each other. Because I can remember, and I'm sure as you well know, if you're walking around in Brooklyn, I don't know how Brooklyn is now because you might be in the part where it's all like rich people with $4,000 baby carriages, but I'm not sure.
Move on.
But
move on.
Okay.
The Brooklyn is too large an area to generalize a stereotype in any way.
That's why I mean, I don't know what part.
Yeah.
But you know, I just can remember so many times even being in like a deli or a bodega or something, and some guy will be like, "Fucking move it," you know? And you turn around and you go, "Chill the fuck out, man. All right? What do you got? What do you got, a rush or something?" And then the guy's like, "Ah, you're right." You know, like that's what people don't get. Like when people think people from New Jersey or New York are like, you're so rough and gruff or whatever. And it's really more like, you know, when you give people the what we call the Jersey salute, you give them the finger just for no reason while you're driving, and then they give you the finger and then you both laugh.
Yeah.
That's just something I miss, and I just love this show so much.
I can't remember where I was. I don't know. I might have even been North Carolina. Who knows? I was somewhere outside of New York at one point, and I remember there was something had happened with me and the middle finger, and it was like as a joke, and someone was like, horrified. and I'm just looking at it like, dude, this is like waving hi at somebody. we don't take middle fingers seriously.
That's exactly what I say to my son.
Yeah, because if this is going to bother you, wait till you talk to me.
Yeah, just waving hi. What are you upset about?
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention is they mentioned very briefly the Pine Barrens, and for those outside of New Jersey, the Pine Barrens are a mystical place to people who live in New Jersey.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why they had them go to the Pine Barrens.
Yes.
Because you have the Jersey Devil, which is the old myth of there being some wild animal out there. You also have, this is another connection to the Star Ledger, because when I was at the Star Ledger, I sat next to this dude whose name I can never remember. One day I'll remember it and I'll go look him up. He was such an amazing reporter, and I loved my time there because there were so many just hard-ass old reporters there. And his beat was the Pine Barren area, and he had actually written many articles about the Jackson Whites.
Wow.
And they mentioned the Jackson Whites. I don't know if you're familiar, but anybody, you can go Google it, but it's basically a really interesting story about New Jersey history and American history. I won't go into it, but go ahead and Google Jackson Whites, New Jersey. And I just think that one little line was put in that I was just like, wow, you know, thanks writers for putting in the Jackson Whites. Who the fuck would put that in there? Because that's something that is really so Jersey. And, it adds, though, again, to the mystical elements and ethereal elements of this particular episode that I think captivates people to this day. I'm getting too much. I got to stop watching Sopranos. My wife is going to kick me in the ass.
I'm giving everyone a couple minutes out there to Google that now. Anyway, so... No, absolutely. And, you know, the only other things I would have mentioned about the episode, I mean, we've kind of touched on the stuff as far as Tony and Gloria was concerned, so we can move on from that, as well as you already mentioned his interactions with both Carmela and Dr. Melfi. And as far as the Meadow and Jackie Jr. stuff is concerned, it's interesting that Meadow has always been one of the more polarizing figures on the show overall, because I think for some people at times, her storylines are I want to get to the next scene already, but it kind of doesn't give the actress or her storylines as much credit as they probably deserve sometimes.
I agree.
Because she's definitely, daddy's little girl. Because again, she's rational. She's another one who just starts rationalizing crazy opinions and behavior, where she breaks down crying about what a great catch Jackie Jr. actually is. It's like, no, he's not. Never, and not because he's cheating on you. Forget that. He's an idiot. You're not. Did you not play? Did you not notice the Scrabble game? I don't care that he played ass. He played the.
Yeah.
No.
The cell phone.
Sorry.
And I love in this show too how she's sitting there kind of thinking, and she looks down at this Scrabble board, and like they show that. And of course, there's a connection between her mother and her father, right?
Yeah, I get
he is Jackie Jr.
That's the rationalization. Is that because they both come from these crime families that they have that connection, whatever. But that it doesn't hold water, and she should know better. But again, that's fine because we all have done that. We have all been with the wrong person, and even after things were over and it was clear that they were the wrong person, we still are upset and we rationalize and we go, no, it wasn't. No, it was. But thankfully, she's got a couple of wackadoos that can help her out in Colombia there. So.
I do want to say,
yep.
I agree with you on Meadow. I think both of the kids get a bad rap when people talk about the Sopranos. I think that they were expertly cast and grew with their roles.
Yes.
And grew with the amount of time and dialogue they got. I mean, even going back to season 1, what was it, the first episode when Tony's mom doesn't show up? And it's
what, no fucking ZD now?
Yeah, what no fucking
dude, I consider that an iconic line. That's an iconic line.
And I think he had and even in that season and later, it's tough. It's tough when you grow up on TV or, in public. Of course, we all know the stories.
Yeah.
But I think that they did a really good job. And I never felt, when you said that about the Meadow parts, I never really felt that way. I was always very interested because again, to circle back to the beginning, when I told you that my father's upbringing, I've often said that, like, if you look at like the beginning of Goodfellas, that was kind of like my father's childhood, like running book and doing all this kind of stuff, which I probably shouldn't get into on a podcast, but that's a long time ago. But
it's okay. We don't have any listeners. It's fine.
No, it's not true. But I can relate to Meadow in a sense that I did not grow up in a crime. My father was not in the mafia. We didn't grow up in a crime family. I'm not saying any of that. It was just a part of his life. But his attitude, Tony represents a certain American male, and he represents the type that would have immediately gotten along with my dad, sans the actual real world connection between Gandolfini. So Meadow I was always really interested in because it was that Michael Corleone shit. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Is she going to escape it, or is she going to get sucked into it in some way? And in her way, she didn't have the choice to be a boss or whatever, right? The family's not like that.
Right.
So it was a little bit of a starker difference, but I thought she did a good job. And I actually think the show did a really good job of her character. Well, maybe once I'm done, I'll reconsider that, but not. Well,
what's interesting about her and some of the other characters like that, like an AJ or whatever, and it dovetails all the way back to when we were talking about the series finale. Even though I would contend that the show did not require any form of, like I said, closure, or this is the end of all these characters' journeys. Where have they ended up? Where are they now, so to speak? But in a way, it did actually accomplish that with several characters, and it was actually very interesting to see where they ended up. Because, for a stretch there, you think, wait, AJ seems like someone who could possibly end up like his dad, because there's a lot of similarity between him and his father, especially when we've seen flashbacks of Tony as a kid and the way he was, and some of and some of AJ's failures. And by the end of it, he's still he's not quite, but AJ does not look like he's going to end up going into the family business. He may end up eventually getting bankrolled for a club at one point in the future, but do we really think that's ever going to happen? Probably not. Meadow, on the other hand, much to her credit, which really shows how far she had come, she has decided she's going, and she's not just going to be a lawyer, she's going to be a lawyer that's really fighting for the people who really need it. And when she mentions that she was actually inspired by something her dad had said years ago about the way Italians were treated, it's like, oh, this might not have been what he had in mind, but that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But then you have a character like, say, his sister Janice, who when you watch the end, is like, oh my God, Janice has become her mother.
Yeah.
Wow. Holy crap. How did that happen? And stuff like that.
Even though she went off to the loony moonies, as they say.
She is watch. I've watched so many episodes of Janice and I was like, oh, I remember. I mean, she's so good at being wanting to throttle.
Yeah.
But the only other thing I wanted to mention about the episode, and again, I love that I dress up really obvious statements and make it sound like, ooh, look what I've discovered, like no one knows. I love the fact that while we can see the seeds of what led to this, because you see that Pine Barrens thing, especially because that's what's most famous about is the Pine Barrens stuff. And like I mentioned, there's a scene in Miller's Crossing, which kind of is very reminiscent of that. But it's interesting that we've seen other things after Pine Barrens, where Pine Barrens definitely left its mark on the TV landscape. Whether it be something briefer, like what happens I can say in season 2 of Fargo, where they take someone out to the woods and whatever. But as far as the whole getting lost in the woods thing, there's an episode of Atlanta, which is very reminiscent of Pine Barrens.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. A great episode. Or there's an episode of Mr. Robot, which is It's basically it's a couple of people getting lost, and I think that is New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it's New York. I think they had driven up to New Jersey, and it's clearly they're doing a Pine Barrens thing, and those are two very different but very. Those are very top tier shows in my opinion as well, Atlanta and Mr. Robot, and it just goes to show you the long lasting effects that the show has had, and this specific episode has had. And I'm sure there's a bunch of others that I've either never seen or just I'm not thinking of because I'm pulling this out of my ass. These are not from notes. So who knows? Is there anything else you wanted to mention about either the series or this episode? Or
no, man.
We've done a marathon. We've done a bigger marathon than I was expecting. So.
Yeah, well, we kept on going. My son was very polite. He's being a good boy. I'll have to thank him after. I mean, I appreciate the time. I appreciate you having me on. This has been so fun to talk about The Sopranos. You are a joy to talk to. Your knowledge and attitude is fantastic. I'm so happy that I've gotten to know you better through the Facebook and that we actually followed it through and did a podcast together. I've loved listening to you and Dan and also other hosts that you have on. This is a great podcast. I really hope you have more than 2 listeners because this is the kind of pods. The thing is, I came up listening to talk radio in New York. I'm not a fan of radio stories. Like if I tune into a podcast and it starts with like, doo-doo-doo, and then someone comes on and says like, I walked down the street. I just turn that shit off. I can't take when they try to create an audio experience for me. I honestly just like listening to people talk about ideas and have conversations. And you do a great job of it. And I've had a fantastic time having a conversation here with you about The Sopranos, man. This was a lot of fun. And I'm going to do a whole rewatch of it. That's podcasting, baby.
Oh, yes.
Gee.
Wow, I am oddly touched, and that's I usually say that to either my priest or the Boy Scout leader. So
I was going to say, don't tell anybody about that.
I see there's a Jew who hates other people. Neither of those things have ever happened to me. All right, so let me. Oh, it's been a while since I got to do this, so now you get to sit through it. Now that we've closed, let me get to where we are in the countdown so far. Oh, you don't even know what's next, and what's next on the countdown. So let's. I love that I keep doing this. I keep running through them so far. So we kicked off back in October at number 20. It was an episode of House's Head. Number 19 was the season 4 finale of Dexter, The Getaway. Number 18, Firefly, the episode Out of Gas. That's such a good episode. Number 17, the aforementioned Mr. Robot, 407 proxy authentication required. Great episode. Number 16, Hannibal, the season 2 finale, which was Miximuno. 15 was The Good Wife, Hitting the Fan from season 5. 14 was The X-Files, Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose from season 3. Number 13 was the season 2 finale of Justified, Bloody Harlan, which should have been Jack, but Brian did a better job than Jack ever could have done on that. Anyway, number 12 was Battlestar Galactica. It was the season 3 finale, Crossroads, part 2. Number 11 was Watchmen, This Extraordinary Being. And when we finally hit the top 10, number 10 was Deadwood, Sold Under Sin from season 1. Number 9 was Game of Thrones, The Reigns of Castamere, a.k.a. The Red Wedding, from season 3. Number 8 was The West Wing, The Two Cathedrals. Just two. Why do I keep adding the to everything tonight? It's because of that Scrabble game. Two Cathedrals. Number 7 was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Hush, from season 4, episode 10. You just heard number 6, which was The Sopranos, Pine Barrens, of course. And now, coming in at number 5 on the greatest TV drama episodes of all time. And one of these days I'm going to get this timed right so I get it right when the cymbals crash. See, I still can't get it done right. Come on. Number 5 is going to be The Leftovers, International Assassin, the 6th episode from season 2. Now joining... But, yes? Joining me on that podcast, that's a good question. Right now, Kelly Smith, who did such a great job in our very first one, when we talked about House way back in October, she is definitely going to be the person joining me. There's a chance she might be joined by one or more colleagues from her podcast, although that might constitute a takeover of our podcast from someone else's podcast. I don't know if I'm cool with that after what happened tonight. No, I'm just kidding. You know what's funny? Having you on and how it proceeded. And I love the conversation. I love being the opportunity to actually listen to someone else talk and whatever. But it reminded me of something that I've seen happen over the many years watching, and again, I'm someone who grew up watching late night talk shows all the time. I watched Carson, I watched Letterman, et cetera, et cetera. And it was always the odd thing that would happen when a talk show host has another talk show host as the guest. And you can tell there's that really odd awkwardness. I mean, it's still good, but there's always, as far as who dominates the conversation or whatever. I remember when Letterman would have Carson on or something like that. It was always, and you could see how uncomfortable Carson was. Except in this situation, I'm the one who got made uncomfortable. It's like, oh, is this what it's like to let someone else talk this much? I'm not used to that.
Oh, wow.
That was great.
Sorry about that, man. I'm from New Jersey.
You are no. You are not supposed to be apologizing for that. I'm the one who has to. The fact that I can finally put out a podcast where I don't have to, 5 minutes later, message them on Facebook, hey, sorry that it seemed like I might have dominated the conversation there, but, I'm Scott. Anyway, no, I don't got to worry about that this time around. But anyway, yeah, Kelly will be joining us for that podcast. I believe we're going to try to release it probably right around the end of the month. And then you'd say, wait, why wouldn't you release it sooner? I have another podcast that might happen in mind. I don't want to say what it is. I'll just say it has something to do with something that's going to happen this week. And I'll leave it at that. And I'll let people guess what it's going to be. And some people might guess one thing, and they'd be wrong. And some people might guess the other thing, and they'll be right. So there you go. And I will be and if it does come to pass, I will be welcoming back someone who hasn't been on the podcast for a few years, actually. And I will say, if certain people want to get their deep dive of certain types of information and knowledge about certain subject matters and genres, I believe that will be a good podcast to listen to, unless we're both either coked up or drunk or something. I don't know. And
sounds good either way.
Yeah, there you go. Oh God, me on coke would be. That would be a bad scene. Anyway, yeah, that's about it. I know when I start talking about future podcasts, next thing you know, it's another 20 minutes. I'm going to stop now. but that's what's going to be in the pipeline. A semi-surprise, though, since I'm telling you it's not really a surprise, but I'm not telling you what it's about. And then number 5. Ooh, wait till we get to number 4 and number 3. Ooh, it's going to be so good. So let's wrap up this podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, guess what? You'll enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page as well. It's the Serious TV Drama Podcast page. Like the page, join the conversation about shows like The Sopranos. It's been one of the main pictures in our cover photo for years now. Now you can actually talk about it. You can also find us on both iTunes and Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to our feed and rate and review us. That last time that happened was, I think, 3.5 years ago, but you never know. Someone might do it again.
No, I just gave you a review.
Wow, I got to go check that out if I can figure out.
Got a new one, baby.
Oh, boy. And you can actually track down our entire archive of podcasts, and I forgot to look at what number this one was going to be. 306. This is back by 306, I'm thinking. All 306 of our podcasts can be found on stvdpodcast.podbean.com. I'm not promoting that Stitcher crap anymore because it's a pain in my ass. And finally, you can follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is at STVD Podcast. That's STVD as in Serious TV Drama Podcast. Axel, thank you so much for being here, agreeing to do this, being patient with some of my own peccadillos here. Hey, I wasn't even mean. That's pretty. I was all set to say all these mean things. I didn't say anything.
Sweet as Paula.
Sweet. I was just staring at the screen like it was like a coffee pot in a Starbucks or something. Like they take our culture, they take our way. Why didn't we get into this thing? No, but it's great having you here. I understand that I don't know if you should be referred to as podcast royalty, but you're definitely a member of the upper tier hierarchy, as far as I know.
Thank you.
Or at least that's what I've been told. I don't actually listen to other people's podcasts, but you know. I always say that because it's true. But I really loved having you here. I do hope that we can do something again in the near future, either be on this podcast or one of yours, if it doesn't involve people having to see my face. And thank you guys out there. I hope you enjoyed it. I apologize if you had to listen to it over the course of 3 nights. But hey, great content. Who cares? Is there anything you'd like to close with the last word, Mr. Axel?
No, thank you very much. I hope everyone enjoys. Check us out, dvrpodcast.com. And that about it. Peace out.
There it is. He got to promote it at the beginning and the end. Never happened before. Good night, everybody.